so let's dive right into it. Question on my mind, because I do think leaders get tangled up with this. I have to, as someone that works with organizations on engagement, they think one of the pushback is engagement, like, isn't this just about making employees happy? And that's almost meant to be dismissive, but I suspect you have a different perspective on this. So tell us what happiness has to do with engagement, performance, the other parts of making a human workplace.
So first of all, the thing that I always say to leaders when I get that pushback is I get it. I spent 20 years of my life as an executive, technology executive, venture capital investor, and I thought that my job as a leader, what did it have to do with making people happy? I wanted them to work hard, I wanted them to have meaning, I wanted them to like roll up their sleeves and solve problems. So I've been there. And I think the first step for us is to not judge that, because leaders think that way because we live in a culture that doesn't treat happiness as anything really quite important. It's this thing we all want, but like if I look at culture, it's like, oh, be positive, smile all the time. Like that is not what it is. So the first thing I just want to like give permission to leaders to feel how they feel, because I understand why. But here's the reality. The reality is when we feel good, and I have a couple things to say about what that means, but when we feel good, research, and I'm not talking about one study or 5, mountains of research show, we perform at the top level of all of our performance parameters. Our analytics are better. We're more productive. We're more motivated. We're more resilient. We collaborate better. We come up with more creative ideas. We work harder and longer. So what I say to leaders is, do you like any of the things I just said? There is no leader who will say no.
Right.
To get there, you have to begin by helping your employees and your team build a foundation of emotional health, because you cannot get there without it. So it's not choose productivity or happiness, engagement or happiness. Your employee happiness is the furthest thing from fluff or extra. I actually talk to organizations about your employee happiness is the greatest unrealized asset that you have in your company. Because remember in the 90s, it was all about efficiency and productivity.
Right.
You know, like how do you run a meeting? Well, we've squeezed out all the productivity gains we can. I mean, all of us are working 12, 18-hour days. 80% of American employees say they either really stressed at work or overwhelmed. There is no more, forget about work-life balance. Everything is molded. So how do you get more productivity? How do you get your employees to have more creative ideas? How do you get them to be resilient through a lot of change and cultural change and company restructuring? You have to invest in their emotional health.
So, okay, so tell me,
Yeah.
we're going to get to the how-to in just a second, but what is emotional health?
Great point. So the biggest myth that I am out there to bust is that happiness does not mean being positive all the time. That is a myth. That is a misnomer. It doesn't. We live in this culture that tells us like, turn that frown upside down or turn the negative into the positive. And we think happiness is like. That's not it. Of course, part of being emotionally healthy is the ability to experience joy, is the ability to, through gratitude, find positive things. But it also means learning how to embrace all of the different emotions that we feel as human beings, and to how do we have resilience to get through the difficult ones. Do you know that research shows that when you allow yourself to acknowledge a difficult emotion like stress and actually experience it, you feel it for a shorter amount of time and with less intensity. And so true emotional health is not just, yes, finding more joy, but it's also having the resilience to get through all the different emotions and all the different challenges that we have. And I think changing the leader's mindset around what that means is the first part of the battle. Because when we stop thinking of happiness as like, happy-go-lucky, and we recognize that it truly is the ability to both find the highlights and enjoy the good things in our lives, but it's also having the resilience to get through challenges. I think that begins kind of the mind shift of, oh, well, this is valuable.
Interesting. So I'm hearing sort of there's like the ability to recognize and manage our emotions
is a huge piece of it, because think about how many challenges you go throughout a workday, just one workday.
Right.
How many little challenges, and then there's big challenges. we need the ability to get through those challenges. So we need to learn how to, and this is part of what we teach as part of our work at a Happy at Work program, and this is part of emotional health, is how do I deal with the stress that I feel? I can't not feel stress.
Right.
That's not possible, right? And I think the other really essential piece, and this is, if I have like one mission in life, it's this, is to stop thinking of happiness as something you feel. It's something you do. Emotional health is a skill. Happiness is a skill. And like any other skill, the more you practice, the better you get. So it's not a destination. It's not something you get to and then you're done. It's not something that some people have and some people don't. When we begin to think of it that way and start to break it down, we recognize, well, if research shows that when employees feel better, they're more motivated, they work harder, they're more productive, there's so much research that shows that companies with happier employees are more profitable and have higher revenue. So we can go all the way there.
Right.
And they're more resilient through challenges. And they cultivate a culture of psychological safety and collaboration that research shows comes up with more creative ideas. Then it's really hard to say that employee happiness is an extra. But it begins with shifting our mindsets around exactly the question you asked. What does it mean to truly have emotional health? Well, this is like the 3 core principles that we call of our happier method, the Happy at Work. And the principles that we've talked about are that, first of all, happiness is not something you feel, it's something you do. It's a skill. Emotional health is a skill. You can learn it, you can practice it, and like any other skill, the more you do, the better you become. And the second is that happiness doesn't mean being, happy-go-lucky positive all the time.
Right.
It also, true emotional health means we know and we have the skills to embrace all the different emotions that we feel, including the difficult ones that we feel all the time at work, and we have the resilience to get through them. And finally is that it's not a choice between productive employees and happy employees. Actually, employees who are happier, again, mountains of research shows that they're the more productive ones. They're the ones that roll up their sleeves to solve problems. They're the future leaders. And so when we help leaders understand the research, understand the data, and really start to think about this in a different way, I think that's the place to begin to shift how they think about engagement and employee happiness.
What I've also, and it's not even just in the workplace. Part of what I'm assuming about your work too is like, if you can accomplish this in the workplace, there's also benefits to their lives beyond. Physical health improves, relationships improve.
Well,
all of these.
Absolutely. And that's why I said at the beginning, like this idea of work over here, life over here, that's not the world we live in anymore. It's work life. We all one. And one of my favorite ways to think about this, I had an opportunity once to be at a round table with Jeff Bezos. And someone asked him about work-life balance. They you run this, one of the top companies in the world, but we also hear you're a great dad. Like, how do you balance? And he said, I hate that word balance, and I don't balance. I don't understand the word. He said, I think about energy. And so he said, when I have a great day at work and I feel like I do my best, I am the best dad there is. I am so engaged with my kids. And when I am so engaged with my kids, I come to work and I'm the best leader there is.
Sure.
So there aren't, and this is like one of the things I talk to leaders so much about, like, you think that if your employee had a fight with their spouse or they had bad traffic on the way to work, you think they're able to just put that aside and put on the persona? It's affecting everything. And the same way, if they feel beaten down at work, overwhelmed, stressed, that no one cares about them, you think they're not coming home and it's impacting their family, which is then helping them to resent their work. So we have to, part of this, we're at a work we have to look at employees as human beings. And you're absolutely right. I cannot tell you how many times we do like a Happier at Work workshop or a presentation, and then we hear from the employees months later and they're like, oh my God, Nataly, this is so weird. I think this has helped my marriage.
Right.
Or I think what I learned during Happier at Work is helping me be a better parent. Of course, because it's all the same skills. You and I are the same human at this interview, and later when we go and hang out with our friends or family. And so that's why I think it's so powerful to think of happiness as a skill, because once it's a skill, that means you can apply it to different parts of your life.
So let's close with a couple of high impact pieces of advice, whether it's for leaders for how to do this for their team or for individuals. Like, Give us like, how do you do this? What are a couple of steps that are right there for people to improve their emotional?
Awesome. So I'll give you two of my favorite practices. So the first is what I call gratitude meeting bookends. So you're practicing your skill of gratitude, which again, mountains of research show it not just makes you feel better, motivation, creativity, productivity. You begin and end a meeting by expressing authentic and specific gratitude to your colleague. You begin a meeting that way and you end a meeting that way. The essential piece there is that you are specific. So, Mike, I'm grateful for you, not very impactful. Mike, I am so grateful for how hard you worked on the project last week. Incredibly impactful. When we receive gratitude at work, we're more motivated, more resilient, and more likely to keep working harder at a problem. So try this. I have companies that I've trained who put gratitude bookends on their meeting agenda. Meeting starts with gratitude, meeting ends with gratitude. Takes less than a minute total. So you can't not try this practice. The second practice that I want to share with you is to practice the skill of kindness, which some people smile when I say kindness. They're like, why do I have to practice kindness? I'm a kind person. We all think we're very kind. And it doesn't matter if you think you're kind unless you're practicing it. So here's a kindness practice, particularly for a leader. Do a regular check-in with all of your employees individually, where you simply carve out 5 minutes and you ask them, hey, how's it going? And then you close your mouth and listen. It's an essential piece of the check-in. You check in, you're not specific, it's not about work, how is this project? It's, hey, how is it going? And then you give them space to talk. There's a study that showed that 40% of employees say that when a colleague or a boss checks in with them, more than any other measure, expensive offsites, expensive benefits, helps them feel like they belong and helps them to feel more motivated to work harder. And I have now taught leaders that run enormous global organizations that do this practice as they travel around. And what I hear over and over again, it's the single simplest and most powerful tool that they have to create psychological safety and trust on their team. So the way I would approach this is I would put it on your calendar. Schedule these 5-minute check-ins with your colleagues or people who work on your team. Ask them how things are going, and then don't talk and listen.
That was awesome.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
for making time.
Of course.
Appreciate it.